It was a Tuesday night in early October, and the chill in the air had just enough bite to make me wish I'd brought a thicker jacket. I had stayed late at the library, finishing a research paper that was due the next morning. The campus had emptied out hours ago, leaving the sidewalks slick with the dampness of an earlier drizzle. I stuffed my earbuds into my bag, not really wanting music, just the safety of knowing if something happened, at least someone might be able to trace me. I started the walk back to my apartment about a mile off campus, a route I had taken countless times before, but for some reason that night, it felt different. The streetlights flickered inconsistently along the tree-lined streets, casting long, jittery shadows that seemed to move with me as I walked. At first, I brushed it off as my mind being tired, stressed from the paper, imagining things. My pace picked up slightly, and I reminded myself that nothing ever happened on these streets. They were quiet, sure, but I had walked home at night plenty of times. Still, there was a weird tension in the air, something I couldn't place. The rustling of leaves seemed louder, every snapping twig sounding suspicious. About a third of the way home, I noticed someone on the other side of the street. They were just standing there, leaning against a lamppost, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over their face. I didn't think much of it at first. College kids sometimes loitered at odd hours, but the longer I walked, the more I realized they weren't moving. No hands in pockets, no shuffling feet, just standing. I tried not to look directly at them. I kept my eyes ahead and walked faster, but every time I glanced out of the corner of my eye, they seemed to be in the same spot, staring. My stomach churned, and I debated crossing to the other side of the street, but there wasn't much traffic tonight. I reached a small park I had to cut through to get home faster. The park was usually empty at night, and the shadows under the big oak trees were deep and foreboding. As I entered, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I told myself it was my own imagination, that maybe some jogger or late-night walker had just entered, but the sound followed my pace, matching step for step. I quickened my pace, my breath coming out in little foggy clouds, and the footsteps did the same. My hands were clammy, and I felt a knot in my chest tighten. The first real moment of panic came when I noticed the sound of a voice, just a low whisper, almost a hiss, right behind me. "Hey," it said. My heart jumped, and I spun around, but the park was empty. I couldn't see anyone in the shadows. My mind raced through all the horror stories I'd heard, muggings, assaults, but I tried to tell myself it was just someone messing with me. Someone thought it would be funny to scare a college kid walking alone at night. But there was nothing funny about the tightness in my chest, the way my hands trembled as I fumbled with my keys. I took out my phone, hoping to call someone, even just to talk to keep myself calm. There was no signal in the park. Typical, I thought bitterly, as I tucked it back into my pocket. I tried to breathe, forcing myself to stay calm, reminding myself I was almost through the park, almost home. The park wasn't that big, and I knew the other side had a street that led straight to my apartment complex. Halfway through, the footsteps picked up pace. I ran, not a slow jog, but a sprint, my lungs burning, my heart hammering in my ears. I could hear them behind me now, close, faster than I thought anyone could run in a hoodie. I didn't dare look back. My only thought was getting out. The lights from the street at the far end of the park grew brighter, and I dove toward them like it was a lifeline. I burst out of the park onto the empty street and stopped, gasping, scanning frantically. No one. My chest heaved and I could feel my knees shaking. I told myself I had imagined it, that my brain was just fraying after a long day of work and stress. I started walking again, slowly at first, then faster as I tried to push the fear down. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. Not behind me this time, beside me. I turned sharply, and there he was. Same hoodie, same shadowed face, standing on the sidewalk, walking parallel to me. We were about the same pace, moving silently like we were in some kind of macabre dance. I tried to cross the street, quickening my pace, but he mirrored me. I tried turning onto a side street. He followed. My pulse hit over 100, my throat dry. I remembered the little convenience store about a block away. If I could just reach it, maybe I could call for help. I started running again, heart pounding so hard I thought he could hear it. I darted toward the store, but as I approached, I noticed the doors were locked. No one inside. The lights were dim, perfectly dark except for the faint glow from the streetlights. I looked back. He was there, just standing on the sidewalk, watching me. His face was still obscured, but I swear I could feel his gaze like a weight on my back. Um, I had nowhere to go. I started running again, faster, zigzagging down side streets, trying to lose him, trying to make it to my apartment complex that was now just a few blocks away. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I checked it quickly. A text from my roommate. "Don't be out too late." I typed back, "Almost home," and shoved the phone back in my pocket. The streets were eerily empty. Normally, I would pass at least a few cars or hear distant voices, but tonight, silence pressed in on me from every direction. I could hear nothing but my own ragged breathing and the faint, almost imperceptible sound of footsteps following me. When I finally reached the entrance to my apartment complex, I thought I could relax. Security lights lined the parking lot, and the front doors were just ahead. I hurried toward them, keys in hand, fumbling with the lock. The door clicked open, and I slipped inside, slamming it shut behind me and locking it immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone to call my roommate. She answered on the first ring. "You okay?" she asked, worry thick in her voice. I didn't answer at first, just leaned against the door, trying to calm down. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just had a long night." My voice shook, betraying the panic I felt. I didn't tell her about him. Not yet. I just needed to get inside, to feel safe. I took the elevator to my floor, locked my door behind me, and finally collapsed onto my bed, trying to convince myself that it had been my imagination. Just stress. Just paranoia. But the next morning, when I checked the news, my stomach sank. There had been a report of a man following college students late at night in our area. Some had escaped, one hadn't been so lucky. The description matched exactly. The dark hoodie, the way he followed silently, never speaking. My blood ran cold. That night had been more than just paranoia. I didn't walk alone after that night. Even during the day, I felt eyes on me when I was out. I avoided the park, took longer routes, stayed in well-lit areas. Every time I heard footsteps behind me, I froze, heart hammering, memories of that night replaying with perfect clarity. The fear had stayed with me, an invisible companion I couldn't shake. Weeks later, I got a notice from campus security. They were increasing patrols, and they asked students to be cautious. I couldn't help but remember the dark hoodie, the silent steps, the way he matched my pace perfectly. The thought of him watching me, waiting, made me shiver. I realized then how quickly something ordinary could turn into a nightmare. A walk home I had taken thousands of times suddenly felt like the most dangerous thing in the world. I started leaving earlier, taking the bus, asking friends to walk with me. But deep down, I knew that night could have gone differently. One wrong turn, one moment of hesitation, and I might not be telling this story. I replayed it over and over, every shadow, every sound, every heartbeat, and I realized that fear had a memory all its own. It would stay with me, haunting me, reminding me that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't hidden in the dark. They're out there, in the ordinary, following you home. Months passed, and I slowly started to feel a little safer. The hoodie never reappeared, campus security increased patrols, and the news stories about the man stopped. But every time I walked home alone, even in the daylight, I felt it. The prickle on the back of my neck, the vague sense that someone could be watching, someone could be following. And sometimes when I thought no one was around, I swore I heard it. Soft footsteps, keeping pace, waiting for me to notice. Even now, years later, and I never take that walk alone after dark. I avoid the quiet streets, the dimly lit paths, the empty parks, and yet I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, someone in a dark hoodie is still walking, still following, still waiting for the wrong person to get too close to the shadows. Story the end. It was one of those nights where the city felt heavier than usual. The kind where the streetlights flickered more than they should, casting elongated shadows that seemed to move on their own, and the wind carried a kind of whisper that made you glance over your shoulder for no reason at all. I was coming home from a late shift at the diner downtown, the kind of shift where your feet hurt, your back aches, and your brain runs on autopilot from endless repetition. Cooking eggs, serving coffee, wiping down counters. I had a short walk home, maybe 20 minutes, through a mix of residential streets and the occasional back alley I usually avoided. But tonight, I had no other choice. The bus had stopped running, and Uber was expensive. The air was crisp, the kind that makes you pull your jacket tighter around your shoulders. I had my headphones in, one ear out, as I always did walking alone at night. Enough music to keep me calm, enough to stay aware. I had chosen a route that would take me down a series of quiet streets lined with old, crumbling houses, some abandoned, some dimly lit by yellow porch lights. I passed a few cars parked along the curb, empty, but for the occasional shadow moving behind the glass. Normally, I didn't pay much attention to them. Tonight, every shadow felt like it was watching. I had only gone a few blocks when I noticed a figure across the street. At first, I thought it was a jogger or someone walking their dog, but as I got closer, I realized there was no dog and the person wasn't moving like they were walking. They were standing, leaning against a lamppost, looking directly at me. My stomach sank. Normally, I would cross the street to avoid anyone lingering like that, but for some reason, I froze. The figure shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, and I saw a glint of something metallic in their hand. My pulse jumped. I told myself it could be nothing. Maybe they were adjusting their keys, maybe it was a flashlight. But instinctively, I started to speed up. The sound of my shoes hitting the pavement felt loud, echoing off the empty street, and I could hear my own breathing in a way that made my chest ache. I glanced back and the figure was no longer by the lamppost. My stomach dropped. I hadn't passed them. Panic set in. I pulled my phone out and pretended to scroll, though I hadn't texted anyone yet. I considered calling my roommate, but I didn't want to panic them over something that might be nothing. Still, I kept my eyes darting from shadows to alleys, every darkened doorway making me jump. I reached the corner where I had to turn onto a narrower street lined with abandoned houses. The kind of street that smells like wet leaves and rot when it rains, the kind where kids dare each other to walk at night, but no one actually wants to be there. I took the turn and saw movement at the far end, a figure too far away to make out details, but it was walking, slow, deliberate. My stomach dropped again. I wasn't sure if it was following me, but the slow, measured pace, the silence, it felt deliberate. I tried to calm myself, telling myself I was imagining it. I counted the steps in my head, tried to convince myself that every time I looked over my shoulder, the person was just part of the street, another shadow, maybe a homeless person wandering. But the unease kept gnawing at me. My pace increased, my ears straining to pick up every sound. The streetlights flickered, and for a moment, the figure disappeared. I exhaled slowly, telling myself I had lost them, but when the light returned, they were closer. I considered running. I wasn't a runner, and my backpack was heavy with leftover boxes from the diner. But I started jogging anyway, each step echoing against the empty buildings. The figure didn't run. They matched my pace, silent, moving like they were gliding just behind me. My chest tightened, and I realized my instincts had been right all along. I reached a small intersection where the street branched into two. I had a choice, the longer route through a park that I normally avoided at night, or a slightly longer route through a busy street with more lights. My heart was hammering as I chose the lit street, telling myself safety in visibility. But as I turned, I saw the figure step out from behind a dumpster at the corner. They hadn't been walking behind me. They had been waiting. Fear made my legs move faster. My phone was in my hand now, flashlight on, camera app open, though I didn't intend to take pictures. I just wanted to see, to make sure my mind wasn't playing tricks. The figure followed. I could hear nothing from them, no footsteps, just the sound of my own panic-stricken breathing. The street finally opened up into a small commercial area, the lights from a 24-hour gas station spilling across the pavement. I ran straight for it, hoping the fluorescent lights and presence of people would deter whoever was behind me. As I neared the entrance, I realized the figure had stopped at the edge of the light. They were watching me. I collapsed into the store, heart pounding so hard I thought the cashier could hear it. I didn't even look at them. I just kept walking inside until I was near the counter. The clerk, a young guy with a faded hoodie, looked at me quizzically. "Rough night?" he asked. Just waiting," I muttered, trying to calm my shaking hands as I pretended to check my phone. I kept an eye on the glass doors. Outside, the figure was gone, vanished into the shadows. I stayed in the store for another 10 minutes, sipping a bottle of water I didn't even need, just to make sure they hadn't returned. I left cautiously, walking toward home at a slower pace, but I kept checking behind me. By the time I reached my street, my apartment building came into view. I hurried up the steps, fumbled with my keys, and finally let myself in. I locked the door and sank against it, heart still racing. That night, I slept with every light on and my phone close, listening to every creak and groan of the building. I told myself it was over, that maybe it had just been a homeless person, a trick of the light, my imagination feeding off the eerie street. A week later, I saw the story in the local paper. A man had been arrested for stalking and assault, caught by security cameras following women walking home from the diner district. He always waited for someone to be alone, always carried a knife, and had a pattern that matched the streets I walked. I recognized the description immediately. He was tall, thin, hoodie pulled over his face, and the glint I had seen in his hand was probably the tip of a knife. I stopped walking home alone after that. I started taking taxis, ride shares, anything to avoid being out there when the city got quiet. But sometimes when I pass those streets during the day, I remember the slow, deliberate steps, the shadowy figure standing still, watching. And even in daylight, it makes me shiver. Months later, I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was fear talking, that maybe he hadn't really been as close as it felt. But then my roommate started walking home late from her job at the coffee shop downtown. She called me one night, voice shaking, saying someone was following her, just like I had been followed. I told her to run, to call 911, and she made it home safely. The police confirmed later that it was him, just released on bail after his last arrest. He had been spotted in the area multiple times. I realized then that what I had felt wasn't fear. It was instinct, a gut sense that something was very, very wrong. My body had known before my mind had processed it, and it had saved me. I never ignored that feeling again. Every time I walk alone, I check shadows, I keep my phone ready, and I never ever let someone follow me unnoticed. Walking home alone is different now. The city streets are the same, but I see them differently. Every darkened alley, every flickering light, every car parked too long in the same spot, I notice. And every so often, late at night, when the wind carries the wrong kind of whisper, I remember that night, the figure that waited, the glint in the hand, and I feel that same pit in my stomach. It's a reminder that sometimes the world is not safe, and sometimes the shadows are alive. Even now, years later, I take the long way around, even if it means an extra 20 minutes, just to avoid streets that feel too quiet. And every time I see someone standing still where they shouldn't be, I cross the street without a second thought. Because one night taught me the difference between imagining fear and sensing real danger, and the night I walked home alone and felt watched will never leave me. Story the end. It was just past 9 when I left the little diner where I'd been working a late shift, the kind of job where the only regulars are the night owls, truck drivers, and a few lonely locals who always seem to know more than they let on. The autumn air had that crisp, almost biting quality that made you pull your jacket a little tighter. I wasn't worried. The walk home was only about 2 miles through a mix of dimly lit streets, residential blocks, and an older, nearly abandoned industrial area that the city hadn't bothered to maintain. I had walked it countless times before, sometimes late at night, sometimes earlier in the evening. But tonight felt different, even before anything happened. At first, everything seemed normal. The leaves crunched beneath my boots, the occasional car passed by, and I could hear the faint hum of traffic from the main roads a few blocks away. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling gnawing at the back of my neck. I always got like this on nights when I was alone, when the streets seemed empty except for the shadows. I passed by the small playground that was fenced in, swings swaying slightly even though there wasn't any wind. It made me pause just for a moment to see if maybe I imagined it, but no one was there. I laughed quietly to myself, telling myself I was being ridiculous. Kids. Imaginations could stick with you even when you're an adult, I thought. Then I saw him. At first, he was just a shadow, a man, I guessed, walking slowly along the opposite side of the street, maybe 50 feet away. His head was down, hands in his pockets, and he moved with a slow, deliberate pace that made me feel off. Not scared yet, but uneasy. I kept my eyes on him as I walked, telling myself that he was probably just heading somewhere too. But then he looked up. I can't explain it, but the way he looked at me made me freeze for a moment. It wasn't just a glance, it was a stare that seemed to pierce right through me. And it wasn't just curiosity in his eyes. There was something else. Something patient. Something calculating. I turned my head briefly, pretending to check something behind me, but he was still there, on the same street, keeping the same distance. I picked up my pace slightly. Just a coincidence, I whispered to myself. He's going somewhere. He's not following me. But then I heard footsteps echoing behind me, not the casual, random sounds of the city at night, but deliberate steps that matched my pace. I stopped suddenly, heart hammering, and waited. The steps stopped too. I waited another 10 seconds, then slowly started walking again. The steps resumed. I reached into my pocket and felt my phone. No signal. Typical for this part of the neighborhood at night. I cursed under my breath. I had no choice but to keep moving. I started to think of ways I could get help if things got worse. There was a gas station about half a mile down, or a convenience store. I could run, but my legs felt stiff from standing and walking all day. I tried something stupid. I turned abruptly down an alley, hoping to lose him, hoping that he would continue straight. The alley was narrow, littered with trash and broken bottles, the walls graffitied with faded messages. I held my breath as I crept down it. My ears strained for any sound, but all I heard was my own ragged breathing and the distant hum of streetlights. I reached the other end of the alley and peered around the corner. My blood ran cold. He was there, waiting, like he knew I'd come this way. I started running. Not a fast, controlled run, but the kind of panicked sprint where your chest feels like it's about to explode. I didn't look back. I just ran. I could hear him behind me, still keeping pace, but not chasing aggressively, just following. Like he was enjoying it, like it was a game. I made it to a wider street and saw a few cars pass. I waved my arms, hoping someone would notice, hoping someone would stop. No one did. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. I see you. I froze. The street was empty. I looked around frantically, heart racing. My mind was spinning. Was this a joke? Was it someone trying to scare me? But the number wasn't local, at least not familiar. I considered calling 911, but the signal was weak, and the few people driving by didn't seem to notice. I kept moving, weaving through the streets, hoping to reach the main road. Every shadow made me flinch. Every distant noise made me jump. I thought about ducking into someone's yard, ringing a doorbell, begging for help, but the neighborhood was quiet, dark, almost abandoned. Then I heard it, a voice, whispered, barely audible, coming from behind me. Don't run. I nearly collapsed. My body seized in panic, but I forced myself to move. Faster this time, sprinting down the narrow streets, the alleyways, anywhere I could. My hands shook as I pulled my keys from my pocket, gripping them like a weapon, telling myself that even if I had to fight, I wasn't going down without a struggle. The whisper came again, closer this time. You can't hide. My mind was racing. I could see the lights of the gas station up ahead. Salvation. I pushed harder, ignoring the burning in my legs, ignoring the pounding in my chest. I didn't care if I tripped. I just needed to get there. And then I tripped. I hit the ground hard, scraping my knees and palms. Pain shot through me, but I scrambled up immediately, panic overriding everything else. I looked back, and he was there. Close enough that I could see his face now. It was obscured, shadowed, but there was a grin on his lips. A slow, deliberate grin that made my stomach turn. I ran the last few blocks and threw myself into the gas station, sliding the door open. The bell above it jingled, and the clerk looked up, startled. I don't think I even spoke. I just gasped for air, trembling, pointing vaguely toward the street. The clerk frowned. What happened? I shook my head. Someone was following me. My words failed me. I couldn't describe it. The fear was too real, too tangible. The clerk's expression changed from confusion to concern. Stay here, he said, reaching for the phone. I'll call the police. I nodded, sinking to the floor behind the counter, trying to calm myself. I kept my eyes on the street, half expecting him to appear at the corner, to wait and watch me again. The minutes dragged by. Every passing car, every shadow set my nerves on edge. When the police finally arrived, I gave my statement, tried to describe him as best I could. They told me they'd patrol the area, but there was little they could do without a license plate, a clear description, or witnesses. I left the gas station with an officer walking me halfway home. The rest of the way, I stayed on well-lit streets, never once looking behind me. It took weeks for me to feel safe walking at night again. I started changing my route, taking longer ways, sometimes even calling a cab if it got too late. But the image of him, the way he waited, the grin, the whisper, never left me. I learned to carry a pocket knife, to text a friend when I left work late, to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. Months later, I heard about a series of attacks in nearby neighborhoods. Women and men walking alone late at night reported someone following them, whispering, watching. Some had been lucky, like me, escaping without physical harm. Others weren't so lucky. I never saw him again, not in the streets, not in the alleys, not even in my dreams. But sometimes when I'm walking home late and the streets are empty and the wind is just right, I feel that same sensation. The awareness that someone somewhere is following, waiting, calculating. That momentary shiver, that gut-wrenching fear that I can't shake. I've learned to trust it, to act on it, because instinct in these situations is the only thing that can save you. And maybe, just maybe, that night taught me more than I wanted to know about the darkness that can linger in ordinary streets, in ordinary cities, in ordinary nights. The memory of his eyes, the sound of his steps, the whisper of his voice, they linger like shadows that stretch long after the sun has gone. And every time I pass the playground, every time I pass that alley, every time I feel the crunch of leaves under my boots in the dead of night, I remember. And I know that sometimes walking home alone isn't just a harmless routine. It's a gamble, and sometimes the shadows are watching. I don't take that route anymore. I don't walk late at night. I keep to the main roads, always near others, always aware. But the fear, that primal awareness, it never leaves. And in some ways, I'm grateful for it. It saved me once. I just hope it never fails me again. Because out there, in the quiet streets, in the alleys, in the shadows of empty playgrounds, he might still be waiting. And maybe next time I won't be so lucky. Story the end. It was just past midnight when I left my friend's apartment on the west side of town. I had stayed later than I intended because we were watching a few episodes of some old crime documentaries, laughing one minute and then shivering the next. When I finally stepped outside, the chill hit me immediately, sharper than I expected for early September. The streets were quiet, almost too quiet, and the streetlights flickered intermittently, giving the pavement an unsettling, uneven glow. I adjusted my backpack on my shoulders and started the familiar walk home. Normally, I didn't worry too much walking this route, but tonight, something in the air felt off, though I couldn't pinpoint what. The first few blocks passed without incident. My sneakers squeaked against the pavement, and the distant hum of a few late-night cars provided the only soundtrack. The shadows of trees stretched across the sidewalk like long, twisted fingers, and I caught myself glancing over my shoulder more than usual. It wasn't paranoia. There was something tangible in the silence, something that made me want to walk faster, even though I had nowhere urgent to be. Around the third block, I noticed a man standing under a flickering streetlight. He was leaning against the lamppost, hands in his pockets, looking down at the ground. I didn't recognize him from the neighborhood, which wasn't unusual for a late hour, but something about the way he was standing made me uneasy. I considered crossing to the other side of the street, but hesitated. He didn't move as I approached. He didn't even glance up. I kept my pace steady, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Then I heard footsteps. Not my own, but someone following behind me. Slow, deliberate. I quickened my pace, telling myself it was probably just someone heading the same direction. But as I turned a corner onto a quieter street lined with abandoned row houses, the footsteps accelerated too. They were still faint, but unmistakable now. My heart started to pound. I pulled out my phone to check the time and signal a friend, but the screen lit up with no service. I told myself to stay calm. Panic would only make it worse. I kept moving, trying to remember every self-defense tip I'd ever read. I was halfway to my apartment, just a few blocks away, when I realized the footsteps weren't just behind me. They were mirroring mine, step for step, at exactly the same pace. I tried a small jog, hoping to shake whoever it was, but the sound matched me. I looked over my shoulder and caught a glimpse of him. The man from before. He wasn't running, wasn't even moving fast. He just glided. There was something in his eyes, or maybe it was the way the dim streetlight caught his face, that made my stomach churn. I turned back forward and ran, my backpack bouncing against my spine, arms pumping furiously. I reached the next street corner and spotted a 24-hour diner across the road. Relief surged through me, but when I glanced back, he was still there, leaning casually against the streetlight as if nothing had happened. I hesitated for a split second, the tiniest miscalculation, and that was enough. He started walking again, slower this time, almost casually but directly toward me. I bolted across the street and pushed through the diner's doors. The bell above jingled, and a tired-looking waitress glanced up from the counter. "Late night?" she asked. I nodded, trying to catch my breath, and quickly ordered a coffee I had no intention of drinking. I kept my eyes on the window. Outside, the street was empty. He was gone. That didn't make sense. He hadn't just disappeared. He hadn't been close enough to vanish in a blink. I stayed there for nearly an hour, making small talk with the waitress, pretending to be a normal late-night customer. Eventually, I convinced myself he had given up. When I finally stepped back outside, the streets were empty and silent. I walked faster than before, but cautiously, every shadow a potential hiding place. By the time I reached the small alley shortcut near my apartment, my phone buzzed to life. A text from my friend, "Did you get home okay?" I started typing a reply when I noticed movement at the end of the alley. A figure was standing there. Not walking, not moving, just standing. My pulse spiked. I froze, eyes straining in the darkness. It was him, that same man. I considered running, but the alley was narrow, walls closing in on either side. My options were limited. I backed up slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. He raised a hand, slow, deliberate, as if to gesture something, but it wasn't friendly. My instincts screamed at me to get out of there. I turned and bolted toward the street, taking the alley's exit two at a time. When I emerged, my street was lit by brighter lamps, and I could see my building just ahead. Relief surged again, but I didn't dare look back. I sprinted the final block, nearly tripping over the cracked sidewalk, and slammed the apartment door behind me. I locked it, double-checked the deadbolt, and sank against it, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of my apartment, every distant sound outside made me jump. I kept imagining him standing in the shadows, just outside my door, waiting. I considered calling the police, but what could I say? That some stranger had followed me and vanished before anyone could see him? I didn't even have a description that would help. He had been in shadow most of the time, his features obscured by the flickering lights. The next day, I spoke to neighbors who had been out late the night before. None of them had seen anyone unusual. The streets were quiet. Too quiet, I thought again. I considered telling friends, but the thought of being laughed at kept me silent. And yet, for days after, I couldn't shake the feeling. Walking home from work, from stores, even short walks to the corner gas station, I felt eyes on me. Shadows seemed to linger too long. Every time I passed under a flickering streetlight, my stomach twisted, remembering that first encounter. A week later, I walked home from a late movie. I had tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, that it had been a one-time thing. The streets were quieter than usual, empty except for the occasional car. I took the same shortcut through the alley. Halfway through, I froze. A figure emerged at the far end, tall, broad-shouldered, hands in pockets. My chest tightened. The hair on my arms stood up. I ran. This time, I didn't stop until I was safely inside my apartment. The adrenaline didn't fade for hours. I started taking cab rides home after late nights, spending money I didn't have just for the illusion of safety. Friends asked why I was suddenly paranoid, why I avoided walking even short distances alone. I lied, said it was a recent injury in my ankle, something physical, easier to explain than fear. Months passed and life went on, or at least a semblance of it. I got used to the extra precautions, the late-night paranoia, the constant checking over my shoulder. Then, one evening, I was leaving work around 10 p.m. The city was alive with the hum of cars and distant sirens. I took my usual route, a well-lit street this time, but something felt wrong. Halfway down, a man stepped out from a recessed doorway. My blood ran cold. He wore a hood pulled low over his face, dark jeans, and a jacket, hands in pockets. My pace quickened, heart hammering. I glanced around. There were people on the street, a couple of cars, but somehow I felt isolated, like the world had narrowed to just him and me. I moved faster, pretending to check my phone. My body tensed as he fell in step with me, step for step, not running, not trying to hide. It was deliberate, like the first night all over again. My stomach dropped. Panic set in. I rounded a corner into a more populated street, hoping the presence of other people would discourage him, but he kept pace. I darted into a 24-hour convenience store, pretending to browse, but my eyes never left him. Outside, he lingered, leaning against the window, watching. I called my friend, whispering into the phone, barely moving my lips. "I think he's back." My voice trembled. I didn't wait for a response. I stayed in the store until I convinced myself he had gone. By the time I stepped outside, the streets were quiet again, and there was no sign of him. Weeks later, I spoke with a neighbor who mentioned hearing about a man loitering late at night in our neighborhood. Nobody knew his name, and he was rarely seen during the day. A few had seen him watching people, sometimes following them for blocks before disappearing. There were rumors, but nothing concrete. Just sightings, whispers, and the knowledge that someone was out there, patient, waiting for an unseen until it was too late. I never stopped walking home alone, but I never took the same route twice. I varied my timing, my pace, and even the streets I used. Lights became my allies, public spaces my shields. And still, even years later, when I pass under a flickering streetlight or hear the faint echo of footsteps behind me, I feel that familiar, icy dread. Because I know in some corner of the city, he is still out there, watching, waiting, step for step. I can't explain why he followed me or what he wanted. All I know is that he exists, somewhere between the shadows and the streetlights, patient and silent, waiting for the night when someone walks alone. And every time I walk alone, I feel it. The certainty that at any moment I could catch that same glimpse of a man who moves without hurry, whose presence chills the blood, whose footsteps echo my own. I have friends who laugh when I tell them the story. Paranoid, they say, just a coincidence. But I know better. I've seen him, felt him, and I've walked alone long enough to understand that some things in the dark are real. Some shadows aren't just shadows. Even now, years later, I still avoid walking alone after dark whenever I can. When I must, I stay alert, I avoid shortcuts, and I make sure there are people around. But there are streets that call to you in the quietest hours, streets that seem empty and safe until they aren't. And then, somewhere behind you, step for step, someone is there, moving with patience you can't outrun, waiting for the exact moment you realize that you are completely alone. Story the end. It was late October, the kind of night that carries a chill in the air that feels heavier than usual, like it's creeping into your bones no matter how tightly you wrap your jacket. I had stayed later than usual at work, finishing up a last-minute project, and by the time I left, the office was nearly empty. Streetlights flickered along the cracked sidewalk as I pulled my coat tighter and started walking toward my apartment. I had about a 3-mile trek, mostly through residential neighborhoods and a stretch of park that I hated walking alone at night, but it was a shortcut I had been taking for years, or at least I thought I had. The first block was quiet, the only sounds coming from my shoes on the wet pavement and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. My headphones were in, playing a podcast, but the volume was low, just enough to hear the narration without completely drowning out the world around me. I always liked that mix, a little distraction, but still enough awareness. Tonight, though, that balance would change. As I approached the corner where the road split toward the park, I noticed a man sitting on the curb. At first, I thought he might be homeless, just sitting there with his head down, hood pulled tight. But something felt off. He didn't seem entirely human in posture, not exactly right. I didn't linger. I crossed the street to give myself distance and walked faster, telling myself I was overthinking. The park was my least favorite part. It wasn't well lit, and the trees cast long shadows that seemed to stretch into shapes that weren't there. I had walked it 1,000 times, but tonight it felt like I had never been there before. The path narrowed, and the crunch of leaves under my feet seemed louder than usual. That's when I heard it, a footstep, barely audible, behind me. I froze. I didn't turn around immediately. My heart had started pounding, but I tried to convince myself it was someone else jogging, someone who would pass by in a second. I quickened my pace. The sound followed. Step, step, step. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing. Just the empty path and the dark silhouettes of trees. My pulse was racing. I told myself to keep calm, but the park felt different now, heavier, like it was closing in around me. Then I heard a whisper. A single word carried on the wind, but it was distinct. Hey! I stopped. My body went cold. Nobody should be here. Not at this hour. Not in this part of town. I glanced around, but the shadows were dense. The path behind me stretched back into darkness. I tried to walk again, faster this time. The whisper came again, this time a little louder. Don't go that way. I broke into a run. Leaves and sticks snapped under my feet as I sprinted. My apartment was miles away, but I couldn't think about that. All I could do was put one foot in front of the other. My mind was racing, thinking about what could be behind me. A mugger? Some crazy person? Nothing I could predict would have prepared me for this feeling. Halfway through the park, I heard footsteps matching mine. I didn't dare look back. The whispers grew more insistent, forming words I couldn't fully make out, like the language was almost English but slightly off. My panic grew, my breathing ragged. The streetlights at the other end of the park seemed impossibly far away. I reached the end and burst onto the street, gasping for air. I scanned the sidewalks, expecting to see someone, anyone. But there was nothing. The normal city sounds resumed. The distant hum of traffic, a dog barking somewhere far away. But the weight of the park lingered. I kept my pace quick, eyes darting side to side, expecting him to emerge from the shadows at any moment. As I reached the residential streets closer to my building, I started to relax. Houses with warm lights made me feel like I was finally safe. I slowed my pace, my pulse gradually returning to normal. That's when I noticed something strange. On the porch of one of the houses, a man was standing perfectly still, staring at me. Not moving, not blinking, just staring. I froze. My stomach dropped. Something about him was wrong. He wasn't wearing normal clothes, more like a long coat that hung loosely, and his face was obscured in shadow. I couldn't see his eyes, just the outline of a head tilted slightly as he watched me. I turned the corner quickly, walking faster, convincing myself it was someone's late-night habit of standing outside, maybe checking the street. But then I heard him, breathing, right behind me. Not from far away, right behind me. My heart jumped into my throat. I spun around, expecting to confront someone, but the street was empty. I started running again, adrenaline burning through me. My apartment building came into view. The doors were locked with the keypad, but I fumbled through it, hands shaking, dialing my code as fast as I could. The door clicked open, and I bolted inside, locking it behind me. I pressed my back against it, trying to catch my breath, trying to convince myself it was over. I didn't sleep that night. I kept hearing footsteps in my hallway, soft and deliberate, though I knew I was alone. Every creak of the building sounded like someone walking toward me. My mind refused to rest, cycling through every possible explanation, none of them satisfactory. The next morning, I went out to grab coffee. The streets were normal again, people walking dogs, cars driving past. Nothing seemed unusual. I told myself it was all in my head. The dark park, the isolation, the exhaustion from work. But deep down, I knew it wasn't entirely my imagination. Weeks went by, but I avoided that park. I took longer routes, walked under streetlights, even when it meant adding 15 minutes to my commute. Every shadow seemed heavier now. Every time I walked home alone, I was hyper-aware of sounds behind me. Footsteps, whispers, shadows that moved slightly differently than they should. Then, one night, I received a message on my phone. Number, no name. Just a single line of text, "You shouldn't have left the park." I dropped my phone. My hands shook. I locked all my doors, checked the windows. For the first time, I realized this wasn't random. Whoever or whatever it was, they had followed me home. They knew me. I started staying with friends, sleeping at their places, avoiding my apartment whenever I could. But the messages kept coming. Sometimes texts, sometimes emails, sometimes a note slipped under my door. "I saw you today." Walking alone again? You can't hide forever. I called the police once, explained the situation. They said there was no evidence, no pattern, nothing concrete, just paranoia. But it didn't feel like paranoia. It felt real. It felt like something was tracking me, observing, waiting. Months, Months passed. I moved, finally, to a different part of town, further from that park. But even then, I couldn't shake it. Every dark street, every shadowed alleyway felt familiar, like the memory of that night had marked me. I became cautious, vigilant, almost obsessive. I checked behind me constantly, refused to walk alone at night, and installed extra security cameras in my new apartment. But one night, even there, I heard it. Footsteps outside my window. Slow, steady, and a whisper, carried on the wind, "You can't escape." I never walked home alone again. I never will. Story the end. It was late. Later than I usually stay out on a weeknight, but I had lost track of time at the library. Finals were looming, and my last-minute cram session had run way over. The campus had emptied out hours ago, leaving just the faint hum of distant traffic and the occasional siren somewhere downtown. I stepped out of the library and pulled my hoodie tighter, feeling the chill that had come with the sudden evening breeze. The walk home wasn't long, maybe 20 minutes if I took the shortcuts, but it cut through parts of the city that I usually avoided after dark. Tonight, though, I told myself I'd be fine. I had headphones in, the music low, just enough to keep my nerves from racing. I started down the street lined with brownstones, the streetlights flickering occasionally as if struggling to stay on. My footsteps echoed in the quiet, and I felt that uneasy, tingly sensation you get when you know you're the only living thing around. The library had been empty, sure, but that was normal. This street, though, it felt different. The shadows seemed deeper than they should be. I chalked it up to exhaustion and the darkness. About 5 minutes in, I noticed something. A figure was walking behind me. At first, I thought it was just a student taking the same route. But as I glanced over my shoulder, I realized no one else had a backpack like mine. The silhouette was too straight, too still. I tried to ignore it, quickening my pace slightly, hoping it would pass by or turn somewhere else. But it didn't. The sound of footsteps behind me grew more distinct, more deliberate. Each time I sped up, so did the figure. I reached for my phone, holding it in my hand without looking at the screen, as if just having it ready would somehow protect me. I debated calling someone, anyone, but then the thought hit me. What if this person just wanted me to know I was aware of them? Fear made my stomach knot, my pulse a jackhammer in my ears. I passed the corner store that was still open, brightly lit, and considered ducking in, pretending to buy something. But the figure stayed behind me. I could see the faint outline now, the way it mirrored my steps. Turning onto a quieter street, I started thinking in specifics. If they tried something, how fast could I get to a safe spot? My apartment was only about 10 blocks away, but each block felt miles long. The streetlights here were spaced farther apart, and shadows pooled like ink at the edges of the sidewalks. That's when I heard it, a soft, slow whistle. Low, drawn out, almost like someone testing to see if I'd notice. I froze for a second, then tried to shrug it off as a kid messing around. But the rhythm of the whistle matched my steps exactly, each note timed to my pace. I started walking faster. My heart was racing, my mind running through every story I'd ever heard about assaults, robberies, or worse. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, that my imagination was playing tricks. But then I heard a voice, low and rough, whisper, "Hey, wait up." I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I started jogging. The sound of my sneakers hitting the pavement was deafening in the empty night. But I could still hear them, closer now, matching my pace, sometimes just a half-second behind. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The figure was tall, wearing a dark hoodie like mine, and the face was obscured by shadows. The streetlights didn't illuminate them fully, but the body language was aggressive, purposeful. Panic hit like a wave. I made it to the next intersection and turned, hoping to throw them off. Nothing. The figure mirrored me immediately, stepping out into the street and following. My phone was in my hand now, ready to dial 911, but the area code hit me. No service. I cursed under my breath. I had never felt so isolated in my life. My mind raced for options. The corner store? Too far. A bus stop? Maybe, if someone was there. But even as I thought that, I realized the streets were empty. Then I remembered the park shortcut I usually avoided. It was a well-lit path that cut 10 minutes off my walk. Normally it was empty at this hour, but it was faster than trying to circle the block. I made a split-second decision and darted toward it. The figure followed, moving faster now, like it anticipated my every step. The park was a narrow trail lined with trees. The overhead lights flickered, leaving patches of darkness. I ran as fast as I could, my chest burning, arms pumping. I heard branches snapping underfoot, but not my own. There was a crunch behind me, rapid and close. I risked a glance and saw them running without haste, unnervingly calm. They weren't chasing with the frantic energy I had. They were deliberate, controlled. My mind screamed at me to run faster, but my legs were already screaming. I passed a bench and thought about hiding behind it, but I realized they would see me. Instead, I darted toward the main street at the other end of the park. That's when I noticed something else. Shadows moving ahead of me, though I was alone in the trail. Shapes in the corners of my vision, too quick, too purposeful to be natural. My brain tried to rationalize it, but the instinctual fear overpowered reason. I felt like I was being funneled into a trap, like the path itself was corralling me toward them. Finally, I burst onto the street. Traffic lights blinked at the intersection, cars driving past in intermittent streams. I ran into the first open 24-hour diner I saw, panting, my hoodie soaked with sweat. The bell above the door rang, and the warmth hit me, almost like a shield. I rushed to a table near the counter, heart hammering, hands shaking. The waitress looked up, concerned, and I barely managed to stammer out, Someone was following me. She nodded, motioning for me to sit. You okay? She asked, her voice calm but wary. I nodded, too shaken to speak further. I stayed there for at least 15 minutes, eyes glued to the entrance, listening for any hint of the footsteps, any sign that the figure had followed me. Nothing came. Eventually, I called my roommate, who promised to meet me halfway and walk the last few blocks with me. When I finally stepped outside again, the street was quiet. My nerves were frayed, and every shadow felt like it moved with intention. We walked together, slower than usual, scanning the sidewalks, every stranger making me flinch. My mind refused to process the rational explanations, the empty streets, maybe someone jogging, maybe a harmless student playing a prank. I didn't care. The fear had rooted itself too deeply. The scariest part, I realized as I unlocked my apartment door later that night, was the thought of how close it had come. How casual, how calm the figure had been. No sudden movements, no yelling, just walking behind me, matching me step for step, like a predator testing its prey. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak of the apartment, every shadow cast by passing car headlights felt menacing. Over the next few weeks, I avoided walking home alone. I took buses, called friends for rides, anything to avoid that stretch of street, the park shortcut. But the memory lingered. The quiet footsteps, the whistle, the shadow that didn't need to run but could have if it wanted. One night, about 2 weeks later, I had to make the walk home. My car had broken down, and I had no other option. I tried to stay calm, but the streets felt alive as if they remembered what had happened. I made the same route, stepping briskly, eyes darting to every shadow, listening for the slightest sound behind me. The headphones stayed off this time. Every sound was amplified. The rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, the faint creak of a gate swinging in the wind. I passed the same corner store, now closed, its lights off, its windows reflecting only darkness. My pace quickened. I reached the park path, debating if I should take it. Memories of the figure haunted me, but the main street route would add 10 more minutes and more exposure. Against my better judgment, I turned into the trail. The lights flickered, and I felt my pulse spike. I kept my head down, focusing on the pavement, counting steps to distract myself. Halfway through, I saw movement. A figure, tall, dark, indistinct, stood ahead as if waiting. My stomach dropped. My first thought was, it's someone waiting for me, watching me, just like last time. I froze for a moment. My brain screamed at me to turn around, to run, but my legs felt like they were stuck in cement. Then the figure stepped aside. My heart slammed. It was just a person, a homeless man with a ragged coat and a shopping cart. Relief washed over me, but my nerves were frayed enough that the scare stuck, embedding itself deeper. I moved faster, exiting the trail, not daring to look back. I finally reached my apartment without incident, locking the door and sliding the deadbolt home. That night, I made a mental promise. Never again, no matter would I take that walk alone after dark. The city streets, familiar and safe in daylight, became alien at night, filled with shadows that could follow you silently, patiently, waiting for the right moment. Even now, when I walk home at night with friends or in a car, I remember that night vividly. The echo of footsteps behind me, the shadow that moved with me, the whistle timed to my pace, it hasn't left me. I don't know who that person was or what they wanted, and maybe I never will. But I know one thing. There's a part of the city that's alive in the dark, and it notices when you're alone. Every late night, when the wind picks up and streets empty, I feel that same prickling fear. The memory of being followed, matched step for step, whispers through me like it's still happening. And I know that if I let my guard down, even for a second, that shadow could return, patient and silent, waiting for me to slip up. Story the end.